Okay, hello. Welcome to the February 2022 SingularityCE community call. I'm afraid this one's going to be a relatively short one, as I mentioned in the Slack and mailing list, for winter weather reasons and other, got kids juggling at home, so I have to keep it short, and I apologize for any kids screaming noise you might hear in the background. This month, because of my availability, unfortunately, I'm not going to do the demonstration portion. What I had hoped to show was a demonstration of some of the new C groups functionality, which has been under development, allowing you to apply C groups limits to containers more flexibly with Singularity, but we'll get back to that probably next month. We'll quickly have a look at what's been going on, the development and things from the roadmap. Since we last spoke in this call, we've had two bug fix releases of CE. 3.9.3 mainly introduced a minor fix for the NVC CLI GPU handling that uses the NVIDIA container CLI instead of our binding behavior. This change was just to ensure that when you have MIGs virtual GPUs on your system with A100 or A30 NVIDIA cards, that the behavior mirrors the old GPU setup in non-contained mode. 3.9.4 was a bug fix release that was to address an issue which came up during the recent update of the Sylabs cloud. So the Sylabs cloud was updated to new versions of many of the components, and unfortunately it was a bit of a rough experience, and we apologize for any inconvenience you had over that time. The 3.9.4 fix was to address a problem actually in Singularity in the client code that was preventing pulling large images, but a workaround has now been implemented on the server side, so that it's not essential to update to 3.9.4. Those large pulls will now work with older versions too, due to the mitigation on the server side. If we go up to the kind of current development work that's going on the master branch, we've got a few kind of fixes. We've changed the way that make install works so that it puts man pages in place by default, and consequently we have man pages in the Debian packages we started to host. So the next full release will have that, and it's in the master branch at present. There's a change to the OCI command, so that when you OCI mount a SIF image to run it with Singularity's OCI engine, we're now setting something called process terminal true. Before we did this, if you ran an OCI mounted SIF with the Singularity engine or another OCI runtime, the default kind of behavior would be very strange. If you tried to interact with a shell in the container or things, you would find that your terminal wasn't really wired up correctly to the shell in the container. Because runc and crun and others set this process terminal true by default, we've decided to follow so that the interactive behavior with the OCI engine by default matches what most people would expect. We've been working on more recently some of the security and kind of limitation features of SingularityCE. So there's updated support for seccomp filtering. where we've changed the dependency we use, and it allows different profiles and some more complete behavior. What I'm working on at the present is what I mentioned I was going to demo, changes to the C groups implementation in SingularityCE. So previously we were using a C groups manager, which directly worked with the sysfs C groups file system to apply limits. And this is limited to only root users being able to manipulate that file system to apply C groups limits to containers. It also didn't really benefit from the improvements that came along with C groups version 2 hitting newer Linux distributions. So we've been working to change our C groups manager to something that properly supports all the unified hierarchy features of C groups v2, and will also support using systemd to create C groups and put containers into C groups. And what this will then allow is something called a delegation of C groups, where once the C group is created, it can be delegated to a user. And in that way, we can allow non-root users to apply C groups limits, so limit CPU usage, limit access to like more RAM than you want a process to have, that kind of stuff, without needing root to kind of impose those. Now, most times Singularity is run in batch jobs under the control of a batch scheduler, which often has options to apply its own CPU limits and memory limits. But being able to provide apply them at the container level will be advantageous where you're running multiple containers in a job, or you really want to apply some kind of limit that isn't supported by your batch scheduler. So that's where we're going on that. And these are items from the roadmap, which we had a look through in previous meetings. Any general questions about the releases or any of this development work?
I have one. On any of those bug fixes important enough to go into the 3.9 series if you have another release?
The bug fixes here, the bottom two, yeah, they will be going into a 3.9 release. One of them is related to dependency, where Cedric actually introduced a patch to fix some behavior, and it had an unintended consequence. So I've patched the dependency to fix that unintended consequence. So that is what we're talking about on this line. And we'll also put the final one into a new 3.9, which will be probably fairly soon. But this stuff down here has happened very recently, just yesterday. So still working on that and going through it. Okay. Any more questions on that? Right. So the next topic I want to touch on a bit is SingularityCE and Aptainer expected compatibility. We've seen some questions on this and a little bit of confusion around. So I wanted to bring up what we know about this, and it's nice that Dave Dykstra is here, as he's on the Aptainer side and he can fill in. The first thing I do want to point out, though, is we've also seen some confusion about the status of the SingularityCE project, particularly with it being referred to as a commercial project. Now, SingularityCE is not a commercial limited license proprietary product. It is under a BSD license, as Singularity always has been, and we continue to release all the code under that. Sylabs does offer support for a pro version of SingularityCE, but we direct our development to the open source version. And what we do is out there for anyone to take and use as they wish. So we want to be quite clear that this situation isn't changing. CE is not a commercial project. This is an open source project under the BSD license, which anyone can take and use under the license terms there. So having said that, then what the situation with compatibility is, from our understanding, is that Aptainer 1.0 will come out in the near future, and the majority of kind of changes in Aptainer 1.0 are features that are being brought in from SingularityCE 3.9. So if you review our 3.90 changelog, we introduced various change defaults and behaviors, new features and functionality, and so on in that release, which was in November. And if you kind of cross-reference this to the Aptainer one, you'll see that Aptainer 1 is bringing in the vast majority of the changes and new features that we released in 3.9. The differences between SingularityCE 3.9 and Aptainer 1 are chiefly going to be related to accessing Sylabs cloud services. So Aptainer has dropped support for the Sylabs Cloud Remote Builder, and the library at cloud.sylabs.io will not be enabled by default, and the key store at cloud.sylabs.io is not enabled by default. It's using a different key server. So that's kind of the chief difference that we'd expect users to see. So certainly if you're looking to use the remote builder, you'll find that that's not going to work if you're using Aptainer. Now, with regard to sort of image compatibility and so on, at this point, because the projects haven't really diverged a great deal outside of the Aptainer name change, there isn't a big concern about features which influence behavior on one side of the fork not being respected on the other side of the fork, and things not being reproducible. We know that the Aptainer project has added some testing and paid attention that images built with Aptainer can run under Singularity, which includes CE. That's tested, and we know that we haven't added changes in SingularityCE which would impact how Aptainer is running containers built on SingularityCE. So that's our view of the kind of compatibility situation at the moment. I think it's a fairly simple situation right now. And Dave, I don't know if you want to give any input.
Yeah, I don't think you mentioned that there's an additional feature, major feature, which is the experimental feature in Aptainer for checkpointing. But other than that, I generally agree. I don't think you've noticed yet. We recently noticed that there was a problem with the execution of CIF files, but that's broken in code that we moved over from SingularityCE. We fixed that. The pound bang header in the CIF files was missing. So that's maybe a regression that you want to look into.
So I did look into that the other day.
Okay.
So I built some stuff, and yeah, I believe that's related to updating SIF and not grabbing a certain piece of code, which is now required to add the hashbang.
Right. So, so that's a regression that you'll be fixing probably in another 3.9 release too.
I don't believe this is a regression in 3.9. I can. I will go back and double check.
I didn't verify it, but
yeah,
somebody said
I don't think
it
that
was.
this is an issue in CE.
Oh, you think? Okay, because
Okay.
somebody said it was, so I didn't verify.
Well, I'll go back and verify that.
Okay.
And, we'll see.
I could be wrong.
Okay.
So that's my main comments.
Okay, great. So so that's the kind of situation as it stands. With regard to kind of thinking about the future, what we'd invite people to do is consider kind of your usage of the Sylabs services. And we've, as I've mentioned, kind of embarked on the work towards SingularityCE 3.10. So if you have any questions about kind of the future and what features are going to be on the CE side of things, our roadmap is open. You can come and talk to us about that, suggest things or whatever in our different spaces. And obviously that can be compared to the Aptainer roadmap and so on. Okay. That's all I really have for today. I'm sorry, it's a very shortened update, really. Are there any questions? Anything else to discuss before we call it a day and I go off to kind of wrangle the kids?
I was going to ask one quick question here. This is Chase Schutte. I'm at Caterpillar. My team's using SingularityCE version 3.9.2. I saw there's a GitHub issue. It looks like it's pretty active. It's with shell escaping, environment escaping. It looks like you guys have it on a roadmap. I was going to see, are you anticipating any changes in how you're handling the shell escaping of characters, particularly with the any arguments being passed to a singularity command?
Okay, so yeah, I know the issue you're talking about here. I'm just trying to find it to bring it up.
Well, here maybe I can give you a link to it. I got it right in front of me.
Yeah, okay, it's 487. I think.
That's right. Yep. I just put a link in the chat if you want.
Okay. So this one, right?
Correct.
Okay, yeah. So what this is about is that when you have environment being passed into a singularity container, or when you provide command line arguments, we have action scripts which kind of in the container set up the behavior of what happens when the container starts, and they process the environment and the arguments, and they're run by an embedded shell interpreter. And the way these action scripts are written, they actually kind of perform a single step of shell evaluation on things. So what you'll find is that if you have some escaping in there, or you have interpretation possible of variables and things, it won't act entirely like Docker does. And there's someone has given in the thread a really kind of extensive description of what they found and how it's different. Now, our kind of view on this is that, yeah, it is different than Docker. And it's kind of unexpected for people who are primarily using Singularity to run Docker containers, but Singularity has a kind of a longer history, which even goes back before it was able to run Docker containers, and it's always had these action scripts and kind of sections in definition files and things, which are shell scripts, and the behavior comes from the design there and how it was implemented. So in the kind of explanation here, I've said that we kind of had an internal discussion, right?
Yep.
And
Yeah. I read through that.
yeah,
I saw that.
yeah, I would say we're kind of agreeing that like it would be a good thing for it to be able to match the Docker container, so it doesn't do the shell escaper. But we can't make that a kind of default immediately, because various people have in their the way they use Singularity or in their definition files leverage this behavior, often in a way which kind of reduces the isolation between the host and the container. They're trying to kind of get things to happen. The way around that we're kind of suggesting to approach this is that we're going to take a look over the 3.10 time frame, this is 3.9 and 3.10, but we're going to move on now. We're going to take a look over kind of making this behavior switchable, so it can avoid the escaping and the evaluation in the 3.10 time frame through an option, and that will probably be incorporated in the --compat flag, which was introduced in 3.9, which kind of bundles up different options that support execution of Docker images more compatibly. So we want to kind of have this optional in the 3.10 series, and then we want to really start talking to people about possibly transitioning towards it being the default behavior generally. We need to speak to people, see how often people are relying on Singularity's current behavior, what it really means in terms of version numbers and breaking things like that. We've got to consider these issues. But for 3.10, optional is the way we're going.
Okay, that is the plan. All right, which I think in our case, for a while, I had been one of the users that I did come up with a workaround, but it was awfully hacky and just just not very robust. So I now have a more robust solution for our workflow. So I think it won't impact us in the future, but it was something kind of on my mind. So I wanted to hear your thoughts a little deeper on what the roadmap was looking like going forward. So no, thanks for explaining that.
Yeah, it's one of these things which I think it's clearly, it would be a benefit for more users than it would be a hindrance for, but we just kind of have to manage the expectations of people and give notice and make sure that any change in behavior gets communicated and properly aligned with releases and so on.
Sounds good.
Cool. Okay. Any other questions or thoughts? Great. Okay, I'm gonna call it for today then. Sorry it's been a short one without a demo, but thanks for dropping in. Thanks for the questions and discussion, and hope to see you again next month.